Hello Chess Universe, welcome to another video from Chess for You. Today we're going to be looking at a game played in 1977 between Garry Kasparov and Guy West. I do not need to say anything about Garry Kasparov, however his opponent Guy West, he is a 2400 rated player. So without further ado, let me quickly get into the game. Garry Kasparov with the white pieces opens up with e4. Guy West replies with c5, so we have the Sicilian defense on the board. Kasparov continues with knight to f3. Guy West goes for knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. So we have the Nimzowitsch variation within the Sicilian defense. Kasparov defends by developing his knight to c3, adding a defender to the e4 pawn. Guy continues with e6, preparing d5 in the next move. Kasparov immediately goes for d4, challenging c5, and Guy West happily accepts the exchange because you're exchanging a c pawn with a d pawn. You're essentially taking towards the center, which is preferable and which is as per the principle. And what does Kasparov get in return? He can take the pawn with his knight and he essentially gets a good central square for his knight. Guy West continues by developing his dark squared bishop to b4, pinning the knight on c3. And if you guys note, this knight defends the pawn on e4. Since this knight is pinned, this pawn is free for grabs by the knight on f6. And Kasparov does not like this idea, so he advances the pawn to e5, attacking the f6 knight, and the knight goes to d5, doubling down on the c3 knight, adding another attacker. And Kasparov defends with a move like bishop to d2. And let's stop here. Let's try to understand how one can continue from this position. Taking the knight with the bishop is not favorable because you can take back with the pawn and you are going to give up the bishop pair to Kasparov, which is not favorable in any variations. And a passing move like castling does not work as well because let's say black goes for this. White can continue with knight taking on d5, opening up discovery to the bishop, and bishop taking on d2 is practically forced, and after knight takes, you take back with the pawn, and this position black has an isolated double pawn, and this knight can go here and make use of this wonderful outpost. Moreover, the king can castle queen side, get the rook on the open file, and you can wreak havoc on the d file. Maybe you can capture the d pawns essentially. So by principle of elimination, going back to the original position, taking the knight with the knight is the only possible move, and that's what Guy West goes for. Kasparov takes the knight with his pawn, challenging the bishop. Now let's again pause. Let's try to understand where does the bishop go from here. You'll soon come to a conclusion that the only place the bishop can go and should go should be where it came from, the f8 square. Because let's say you make a move like bishop to c5, that's going to run into queen g4, attacking the pawn on g7, which is weak, currently undefended. And let's say you make a move like castling, which is a mistake because that's going to run into bishop to h6, threatening a checkmate on g7. And the only way of avoiding the checkmate is to advance the pawn and give up the exchange, right? And let's again go back and let's try to understand here that a possible way of defending the g7 pawn would be to actually get the queen to the f6 square and then add a defender. However, you can see that this f6 square is not under the control of black because the e5 pawn is like a thorn in black's position, controlling that critical f6 square, preventing black from using it. So that's the gist of the position. I'm just helping you guys to understand the significance of the e5 pawn. Okay, so going back to the original position, so taking your bishop to f8 is the only logical approach because you want to add a defender to that weak g7 square, right? And Kasparov continues by developing his light square bishop to d3. Guy West continues with making d6. The point here is that he really doesn't like the pawn that is on e5. He wants to dislodge it. And as white, you do not want to take and give up control over that critical f6 square. right? So Kasparov realizes that, of course, and he makes the move queen to e2. And let's say black takes on e5. You can take back with the queen, and you have this dangerous queen which is scoping the entire freaking board. Moreover, white's pieces are well developed, and the king is all set to castle, whereas black's pieces are pretty much doing nothing. If you guys can notice, the pieces, they're doing nothing, so you do not want to give such a position to Kasparov of all. So going back to the original position, so taking the pawn would not be favorable at this point. So black goes for knight to d7, adding another attacker to that e5, pawn. And this is a blunder, or a mistake I should say. I want you guys to pause the video and think of a good continuation for white, starting from now. Okay, I hope you guys found the move knight takes on e6, attacking the queen. Now the point here is, like, you won't be able to take with the pawn. Let's say you do, that's gonna run into queen h5 check. And let's say you defend with a move like g6, you can take with the bishop, and after pawn takes, you can again take back with the queen, attacking the, or checking the king. And after king moves, you can check again with the bishop. After knight comes in between, you can take the knight, and after the king moves, you're going to lose your queen. So this is one such variation which is looking terrible for black. So taking the knight with the pawn is not favorable. Guy realizes this. He instead goes for queen to b6, avoiding the attack posed by the knight. Kasparov continues with knight to c7, forking the king and the rook, right? And although the queen can take the knight at this point, and let's say the queen actually does take the knight, that's going to run into pawn takes pawn, discover check, and also winning the queen in that process. So you're going to lose this queen if you take the knight with the queen. So guy realizes that there is nothing much that can be done, because let's say if the king moves, and you're gonna lose the rook, right? And the position is pretty bad for black, because you won't be able to hold this position against a super grandmaster, let alone Kasparov. And guy realizes this, and he resigns in this particular position, right? So I hope you guys found this video informative. If you do, please do hit the like, subscribe, hit that bell icon to get notified of future videos. If you guys want to share some feedback, please use the comment section. Thank you all. Please stay tuned for future videos.